Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is our first video where we're actually going to do some coding, and I think I've got a pretty exciting project. So this is something I wanted to do for ages really, but I just never got around to it. Little bit of a backstory. So I use a software for my company called QuickBooks. QuickBooks is an accounting software. It is basically connected to my bank account, so it pulls in every transaction. I have to have all invoices uploaded to this platform matched against all the transactions. Now the problem is it's either a manual process, because I have to log in to QuickBooks and then upload the files individually, one by one. There is also an option to forward the emails. So QuickBooks gives you like a QuickBooks email where you can send an email with the attachment and it will automatically upload it to your QuickBooks account. Now the problem with that is I use Gmail for my business emails, and you can set up email forwarding, but the problem is to be able to set that up, you have to add that email address that you're gonna forward the emails to. And then what Google does basically is it sends an email to that new email address that you added with a link. You have to click that link to get that email address verified, and then you can use that email to like forward emails to. Now the problem is, because we get a QuickBooks email address, we don't have access to that email. So when we add that email into QuickBooks, it will send the email, but you can't actually click the link because you have no access to that QuickBooks email account. So what my idea was is write a script that will run as a cron job maybe once every hour. And what it will do is it will use Gmail's API to list all of our emails with a filter edit, so we can do like, you know, any email that hasn't been read, any email that has an attachment, that attachment has to be a PDF format, etc, etc, and then read all those individual emails, get the attachments out of them, compose a new email, send that attachment in that email to the QuickBooks email account. So it's basically like a workaround the email forwarding. So that's what we're going to do today. So to get started, you first have to log into Google Cloud Console and create a new project. You're going to call it, I don't know, QB for QuickBooks Invoice Forwarder, for example. And then we can click next, and we have to enable the Gmail API. Okay, so now that's enabled, we have to go to API and services and create a credential for our app. We're gonna create an auth to client ID by clicking up here on this button and then click auth client ID. We are gonna have to first configure the consent screen. So app name, we can use QB invoice forwarder again. User support email, I'm just gonna use mine. Company email, and click next. We are going to use this internally. Contact information, again, I can just use my company email. This is not going to be public, so you can just put whatever you want in there. So now we go back to API services, credentials, and again, we create the new auth client ID. Application type, I'm just going to select desktop app for now. For the name, we can say the same, basically QB invoice forwarder, and then we can click create. So now that's created, we get our client ID and then we get our client secret. You can download it as a JSON, so you still have it. In fact, I will download it as JSON and then click OK. So now that it's done, the next thing we're going to do is we are going to set up our Node.js project. So now we've got the credentials, we can actually start setting up our project. So I'm going to create a directory called QB invoice forwarder. I'm going to go into that directory and I'm going to say npm init-y, which is going to initialize a node project for us. Now I can go ahead and open it up in my IDE. I use PHP Storm. There we go. Now we have that opened up, we can actually start installing some packages. First thing, what we're gonna do is we want to use TypeScript. So I'm going to install as a dev dependency TypeScript. With that, I'm going to also install types for Node, and I'm also going to install TS Node. Great. So now that we've got TypeScript set up for this project, I can actually run tsc -init, which will initialize our TypeScript file, the configuration file, and I just want to clean this up a little. Okay, we can actually start writing some code. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a source directory because I specified the root directory to be source. So I'm just going to say make directory src, and I'm going to create our first file in there, app.ts. Cool. One thing that we need to do is in our package.json, I'm going to do on the script, I will say build. So to build the TypeScript projects, we're gonna use npm run build. For dev, I want to have like a dev command as well, so rather than I have to build the application and then run the JavaScript file all the time. So I'm gonna say node, and I'll use the loader to be ESM. Source is gonna be not index. I'm gonna say app.ts, but in between those two, I'll say watch path source. So it's gonna look at every file that gets changed inside the source directory. It will reload the script for me. And I think that's it for now. Right. So now we've got the credentials. Remember, we have the client ID and we have the client secret. So in the .env file, I'm gonna say Google client ID, Google client secret, and we're gonna need the Google refresh token. So we can use Google refresh token to communicate to Gmail's API basically. Right, so to get the refresh token, first we need to get the client ID. So Google client ID, and we need to get the client secret. So the secret is going to be at the end. So now we've got both of them. We need a way to generate a Google refresh token. So to be able to get a refresh token, we first have to authenticate ourselves and allow our application to be able to communicate to Gmail API and get information from our Gmail account. We are going to write a quick script to generate that token. So I'm going to say touch source, can call this Google token. So yes, for now. What we're gonna do is, before we start, we have to install Google's SDK. So I'm gonna run npm install Google APIs. Great. So now that's installed. I can probably at this point install .env as well. So npm install. The reason we need that is because we want to use the .env file to read the environment variables. So to be able to read environment variables from the file, we have to first import it. So we are going to import .env config. So now we can basically access process.env client ID. So I'm going to create or come up with a redirect URL. And we're gonna make a quick server. So we're gonna make this listen on 3000. I'm just gonna do callback for now. It doesn't really matter because we're only gonna use it once anyway to obtain a refresh token. So we are gonna create a auth client using Google's API. So I'm gonna say google.auth2. There we go. And it's going to use Google client ID, Google client secret that we already put inside the env file. And it's going to use our redirect URL. We also have to specify scopes. So basically Google can show the user what our application is going to be using. You can look up all the scopes on the documentation. I've already found and already selected the ones that we are going to need. So we are going to need the read scope, modify, compose, and send. The reason we need the read only is because we have to list the emails with a filter so we can see all the emails that have a PDF attachment to it. The modify is needed because what we are going to do is once we get the attachment, once we get that forwarded to QuickBooks, it is going to be processed. So we have to modify that one email to say remove the unread label and also add the label. We are going to add the label to it called QB forwarded or processed or something. So we know that next time our program runs, it is not going to pick that same email up. So it's not going to send duplicated files to QuickBooks. Obviously, compose and send, we need that to be able to send a new email using that email address to QuickBooks. So once we have specified the scopes, we are going to come up and start building our server. For that, we are going to use just a standard library. I'm going to import create server from node HTTP. I'm going to say create server. Okay. So for now, the next thing, now we create a server, we are going to have a try catch block inside here. We're going to close the server. So it doesn't matter if it succeeds or if it throws an error, we're going to close the server because then we're going to have to restart our program anyway, which will then create a new server. Next thing, what are we going to check first? We do want to check if we do get a URL. So if the request URL is empty, we are going to just return. Next thing is we want to read the request URL. And we are going to make sure that the request URL path is equal to what we specified. So it's going to be /callback. And if it's not, we are going to do a 404. So we're going to write 404 to the header as a status code. And then we're going to say end the response by saying not found. Again, this is just a really, really basic server that we're only going to use once to obtain a refresh token. So now that we have that, I want to get the code. So to get the code, we want to see request URL, get it from the search prompts basically. And if we have not received the code, so this is where Google is going to redirect us. So we expect to have a code in the query parameter. And if we don't, we are just going to say code not found. Or we can say Google all of did not return a code. If we have the code, we can get the tokens by calling the auth2 client, what we created on the top, and then get the token from the code that was provided. And we are going to set up our response. So we are going to say it's a 200 response code, and the content type is going to be a plain text. And we're going to end it. We can say authorization successful. You can close this and return to terminal. There we go. We are going to console log the access token. We are going to console the refresh token, the expiry date, and the scopes. So we have some feedback basically. If there's an error, we're just going to say we want to probably see the error. But we are going to write a 500 and just say authorization failed, please try again. Now that's our server created. What we're going to do is with the server is we have to make the server listen on port 3000, and we're going to have a callback. So whenever the server starts up, we want to see a URL that we can follow and authenticate with the application. So we are going to use the auth2 client. We want to generate an auth URL. The access type is going to be offline. Prompt is going to be a consent, and then we specify the scope that we specified up here. Okay, so now that is already we can just run npx tsx source google token.ts. This will, as you can see, create and give us an authentication URL, which we can click, and it will take us to Google's website, and it will ask to choose an account. So for this, I want to use the accounts email because that's where I'm going to get all my invoices to. So I'm going to select an account, and here we're going to see the scopes that we defined. So you can see QB invoice forwarder application, that's what we called it, is going to be able to view your email messages and settings. It will be able to send emails on your behalf, manage draft and send emails, read, compose and send emails from your Gmail account. So I'm just going to say, yeah, allow. So I now get a successful message, and if I close this window, go back to the terminal, I can now see the access token, and I have a refresh token as well. So all we're going to need from here really is the refresh token. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go back to my .env file and paste it into my .env. Great. So now that is done, we can really delete the Google token file because we're not going to need that anymore. So the next thing is what I want to do is I want to set up the folder structure before we actually start coding. I like to separate the business logic to the actual application. So that is what we're going to do. First, I think we're going to create a wrapper around the Gmail API. So our application don't really have to know anything about the Gmail API. We are going to have our wrapper, which is going to communicate with Gmail, and our application going to use the wrapper to call the Gmail API. You will see in a second what I mean. So I'll first create a folder called services. Inside that service, I'll create a TypeScript file called gmail.service.ts. I'm also going to create a config folder where I can create a, do I call it Gmail or Google? I'll call it Gmail. gmail.config.ts, and we're also going to have an index.ts file, which is basically just going to export from, not Google token, from gmail.config. Now we've got the config and then the services. I'll also want to create a new folder called modules. Inside the modules, I want to make an invoice folder, and the file is going to be process invoice.ts. So what is going to happen basically in the app.ts file, we're going to create a main function. That main function is going to load our configuration values. When the configuration values are loaded, it's going to call the process invoice function within the process invoice file. The process invoice file is then going to communicate with our Gmail service. So essentially, if one day to another I say I'm not going to use Gmail anymore, I'm going to use Outlook or something else, I don't have to change the application code. I don't have to change the process invoice code. All I would have to change is either completely change the service, the Gmail service to Outlook service, or I create a new Outlook service, and then I can basically just pass it in and then use that. So I like this clean separation for the codes. Great. So next question is really, where are we going to host this? I was thinking to run this on AWS as a Lambda. So we can set up a cron within EventBridge. Say this cron have to run once every hour, and then it has to trigger a Lambda function in AWS. The reason I chose this is it's going to be cheap. It is going to be really, really cheap a month. So I would think probably a couple of pennies a month, maybe. It's not going to be £1 even a month, so it's going to be really cheap to run this service. Now, the way I like to do this is I like to create a CDK configuration within the code itself, rather than going to AWS and then click around, set up in console, because if something were to go wrong, I always have to go back and do it manually. Whereas if I have a CloudFormation set up, I can just run that code and it will create all the resources in AWS. First thing first, I think we are not going to use env variables anymore because AWS has a service called Secrets Manager. So we are going to store all our secrets within Secrets Manager. And let's just do that. So now I'm logged into my AWS account. I can just go to Secrets Manager and I can store a new secret. So for this, we're not going to store database credentials. We are going to store OAuth tokens. So we are going to need a client ID, a client secret, and a refresh token. So I'm just going to go grab these values and then paste them in here. I'll add 2 new rows. Like so, you get the client secret and the refresh token. I'm going to click next. I'm going to call this QB invoice secrets. And I'm going to create next and store. So now that should created our secret here. We have our ARN, which is basically a unique identifier for your resource. What we're going to have to do now is we're going to create a configuration file so it can basically read the values from that QB invoice forwarder. So let's start with the first thing. We are going to export a type called Gmail config. In the Gmail config, we are going to have a client ID. It's going to be a string. We're going to have a client secret, a string, and we're going to have a refresh token as a string. Now, there's a couple of things we have to do before. We have to install AWS SDK. So I can just do npm install and then paste it in, because all we need basically is the client secrets manager. And once that's installed, I can create a new client, secrets manager client, and we're going to import it from AWS SDK, and we can create a function now for const get Gmail config, which is basically going to be an async function, and it will return a Gmail configuration. Now, what we're going to store in the .env file though is the secret ARN, and if we don't have that secret ARN, we're going to throw an error saying it is not set. So all we have to store in here now is the secret ARN that we get from AWS. And we can move on and we can send a request to the secrets manager to retrieve the values of that secret. So I'm going to say response. We're going to call the client. I'm going to say send. We are going to send this command. We are to get the secret value, which I'm going to again import from the same library. And we specify the secret ID to be the secret ARN. Now, if we don't get a string back, so if the response secret string is empty, we are going to say that the secret does not contain a string, does not contain a string value, and throw an error. Otherwise, we are going to pass that into JSON so we can then return it. So we can say return client ID, Gmail config, and so on. But we need to use the exact same secret keys in here. So I'm just going to copy and paste them. There we go. So this file should be working now, and we can test it quickly by going into our app.ts file. I can say, I can create a main function here, and I can just say const google config, wait, Gmail config, get Gmail config, it was get Gmail config. There we go. And I can console log Gmail config. Of course, this is not going to do anything at the moment because we need to call main, and we can say catch error, and then there you go. Now we should be able to just run npx tsx source app.ts. Oh, so we don't have secret error and environment variable set, which we do because we have added to our env file. But we have not imported the .env config here. So now it should be able to read from the .env file. There we go. So now we get the clients back using Secrets Manager from AWS. Now the reason I can do this is because I already have AWS configured on my machine. And for you to do that, you will have to download the AWS CLI and then authenticate, create a credential for yourself that has permission to read from the Secrets Manager. So moving on. Now that this is working, we know that we can get the Google config. The next thing I want to do is I want to work on the Gmail service. And what we're going to need to do here is we are going to need a couple of functions that will communicate with Gmail's API. So what we want to do in this app, we want to list the email messages. We want to read and get attachments. We want to be able to send an email, and we want to be able to modify the email messages. Right, so we need to go one by one. I want to create a type first. I want to export a type, call it Gmail client. So we're going to say list potential invoice emails, and it is going to return a schema list messages response from Google Gmail API. I'm gonna want to move this up to the top. We also want to have a get attachment or get attachment. We are just going to pass in the message ID. We don't need the attachment ID. We will find out the attachment ID from the message ID, and it will return a schema message part body. We want to have a send message function that will take a raw message, and I'll tell you why later. This will return nothing. And we want to have a last function called move to processed. It's going to be a message ID, and again, return nothing. So what we're going to do now is we create a function. We're going to export this function, and we're going to say create Gmail client. There we go. This will return a Gmail client, which will then have these functions there. So before we can actually create the functions, we're going to have to authenticate. So I'm going to say auth going to be new Google dot auth dot all auth2, and we can specify the client ID secret and then set the refresh token for the credential. So for this, we want to use the configuration that we already returned from Secrets Manager. So we can get a config parameter passed in, call it Gmail config. It's going to be the type. So now we can use config.client ID and then the client secret. So after the authentication is done, we can set the credentials to be refresh token, and that's gonna again come from the same Gmail configuration file. We want to authenticate, we want to use Gmail, so we're gonna create a constant called Gmail to access the Gmail version 1 API using the auth specified above. So now we have that, we can actually start working on the functions that we have listed here. So first thing we want to do is we want to have an API call to Gmail's API, and we want to say Gmail users messages.list. We want to list all our messages. User ID is going to be the email address that you want to list the emails for. You can use me if you want to list the emails for the same user that you authenticated as. And we can have a queue as a filter. So what we want to have in a filter is we want to show all the emails that have not been read. The email that has not have a label called QB forwarded. Emails that has at least one attachment. That attachment is PDF, and either the subject or the file name contains the word invoice. So to do that, we can just do is unread. We can say label does not have QB forwarded. We can say it has an attachment. The file name extension is going to be PDF. And then we're going to group the next ones together because we're going to say subject contains invoice, subject contains invoice, or file name contains invoice, and we're going to return the results. We can actually test this out because it should already work. So now we can actually create our Gmail client, and we can pass in the Google config, and then we should be able to get the emails by calling Gmail client list potential invoice emails. So we can console log and see if that works now. So if I just run again, say npx csx source app.ts, it returns 0. And that is probably because I don't have any email with an attachment that is unread. So I can open up my Gmail account, and what I can do, I can send a new email to accounts email address, and I can say test email without attachment. This is a test email. So I'm going to send this email now just to check if it works. And if it does, it should return the same result, which is nothing basically, because I have not attached any PDF files. There we go. That works fine. So I'll create a new one. I'll send a new one. Invoice with attachment. So I can say there's an invoice attached, and I can attach my invoice. I've got a test PDF file here already. So I'm attaching that PDF to the email now, and I'm going to send it to the accounts at innoval.co.uk. So now if I run the command, it should return one result. There we go, with an ID and a thread ID. So we know that it works now. The next thing we want to do is we want to extract the PDF file, the attachment basically, from the email. So the next one is going to be get attachment function that we're going to work on. And the way we are going to make it is we're going to make this an async function. We are going to read the message. This apparently takes a message ID. We're going to say await Google Gmail dot users dot messages dot get. So we want to get that one specific message ID for the same user. And we can do a safety check to say if this message does not have any parts, which means it does not have any attachment, we are going to throw a new error, say no attachment found. Otherwise, we are going to create a new variable called attachment ID. It is just going to be an empty variable for now. And we are going to loop through all the parts of the message. We are going to check for a PDF, and if it's found one, it is going to assign the attachment ID. Then we're going to check if the attachment was found, and if it wasn't, we're going to throw the same error. Once we get the attachment back, we can get the response from the attachments to get the attachments of the message. So we're gonna again specify the user ID, which is us, the message ID, and the ID for the attachment, and then we are going to return the data for that. So now we listed the invoices and we can get the attachment for the individual invoice. The next thing we need to do is we are going to be sending a message. To send the message, I mean, it is going to compose an email within that Gmail account that we authenticated as, and it's going to send it to a specified email address that we can set up. In this case, it's going to be the QuickBooks email address. We're going to make this an async function as well. And what we're going to do is it's just going to literally send the message by calling the Gmail API again. This is send method from the function, from the messages. This is going to take a raw message that we're going to do later. But it's basically Gmail, if you specified request body, Gmail expects us to send a base 64 encoded message. So we're going to say from the raw message, convert it to a base 64 URL. And that literally is it, because as we said, it's not going to return anything. It's just going to send the message. The last thing we want to do is when the message is sent, we want to remove the unread label and we want to assign a label to it. In this case, it is going to be QB forwarded. So I'm going to make it an async function as well. And I'm just going to say wait gmail.users.messages.modify. We want to pass in the message ID. We want to add the label IDs, and my label ID is this. And we also want to remove label IDs of unread. So now our wrapper is done as well. We can list the emails, we can read and get the attachment, send an email, and modify the email message. That literally is all we need. So now we've got the service, we've got the config. We need one more thing, which is going to be the actual module. So this is going to be a really short script as well. First thing, we want to specify the type, the dependencies for this function. So again, I'm going to say process invoice dependencies. And I want to have a client passed in, which is going to be a Gmail client in this case, and a forward to email address, which is going to be a string. So we create our function, process invoice, and it's going to take a client and it's going to take the forward to email string. So what we want to do now first is we are going to grab this from here because we don't need it there anymore. The application, as I mentioned, it's not going to know anything about the Gmail API. So we are going to do all the logic in here. We can just call the client. And therefore in here, what we can do is we can just say process invoice, pass in the Gmail client that we created, and then specify a forward to email. Now this can be hard coded, or we can use we can also have it in a config file, and I will probably do that. So I'll create a new config file called emailer config. And all I'm going to do here basically is, I'm going to create a function, get emailer config. I'm going to also create a type, emailer config type, and it's going to ever forward to email. So what we're going to do here is we are going to check if process forward to email is set. If it's not, we are going to throw an error. Otherwise, it will return the configuration. It will return an email config type. So in here, as well as the Google config, I can get emailer config to get the emailer config result back. So in here, I can now pass in emailer config dot forward to email. And this literally is going to be our app.ts file. You can see it's really short, knows nothing about Gmail's API. It has its own wrapper. It has its own way of getting configuration. And what this allows us to do is we can easily swap Gmail client. So if we want to create an Outlook client, for example, we just create a new service called outlook.service.ts, and we create the same exact names for the methods. And then in the app.ts, we, instead of Gmail client, we would call it Outlook client. We would create an Outlook client here, load the Outlook configuration, pass Outlook client inside the process invoice, and process invoice would handle everything the same way using the Outlook client now and not Gmail. What we are going to do here, first we need to get the invoices. First we need to get the messages. So we are going to return the list of messages from the Gmail client. And if the messages length is 0, we're just going to return nothing. Otherwise, we are going to loop through the messages and we will check if the message has an ID. And if it doesn't, continue to the next one. If it does, we're going to do a try catch block here. Error. And inside here, we want to get the attachments by calling client.getAttachment, providing the message ID. And we want to build the raw message data. Where are we going to get the message data from? We are going to compose it in the same file here. Once we get the message data, we want to send the message, and we also want to move the message to processed. Otherwise, if there was an error, we can say error processing invoice email with the error passed in. So how are we going to create the raw message? We're going to create a new function here, which does not need to be exported because it's just going to be used internally inside this file. So we can say create raw message. So this raw message is going to take a message ID, an attachment, and the forward to email. Now, I'm not going to type this out because to set up the raw message is quite long. So I'm just going to paste it in here. So this is going to be our create raw message function, which we're going to call in here, passing in the message ID, the attachment data, and the forward to email. And I think that's pretty much it. We have covered everything. This is going to now create the Google config, which is basically getting the client ID, client secret, and the refresh token from AWS Secret Manager. It will get the emailer config. That basically is just an environment variable. It will create a Gmail client, and then finally it will call the process invoice function. Process invoice function will use Gmail client wrapper to talk to Gmail API. It will retrieve all the potential invoice email messages, loop through each of them, find the attachment for the email, create the raw message, forward the message to QuickBooks email, and then mark that message within Gmail as read and move it to QB forwarded label. So next time it doesn't get picked up. So I think if we were to try this now, so now I'm logged into my QuickBooks account, I can go to receipts. You're not going to see anything here for now, but I can just take this email address and I can use it in my .env file. I can say forward, I can't remember what we called it, but I can just grab it, forward to email. And now if I run it, because I've sent a message already with a test PDF, it should be able to see that message, grab the PDF, and then send an email using the same account's email address that we authenticated as, and send this email to the QuickBooks email address, and then it should show up on my list here. So let's just test it out. We can do npx tsx source app.ts, and there we go. We have not received an error, which is good. So that would mean that it now forwarded the PDF to my QuickBooks account. And yes, I can see a new PDF file coming in. There we go. And it has been added for review now. And we can see the top file has been added with the PDF file. And if I now run it again, it shouldn't send one because it already has marked it as read and it already has a label. I can see the first one that we had without the attachment. This is the next one with the attachment, and it has now been marked as read, and it has a label called QB forwarded. Great, so now that works. What we can do is we can set up our CDK for this, so we can actually deploy this service using CDK and CloudFormation to our AWS account. So I'm going to create a folder called infra. So inside infra, I'm going to say CDK init app language TypeScript. If I could type CDK init. There we go. I will delete the tests for this now. So we don't need any tests in here because we're not going to be using tests for the CDK for now. So I'm going to clean this up now. Let's see in the lib. We're not going to use SQS. So this is our main file basically. This is where we're going to define what services we want to spin up and how we're going to use them. I'm not going to pass any properties here. In the infra stack, what we're going to need, we are going to need to access the secrets. We are going to need a Lambda function. We are going to need a cron rule. And I think that's it. To get the secrets, we need to import in as secret manager from CDK lib. We also going to need Lambda. We are going to need Lambda Node.js as well. So to get the secrets, we can use secret manager dot from secret complete ARN QB email forwarder secret manager. And then to get the secret value, we are going to use the same secret ARN. Cool, there we go. So now we've got the secret, we can create the Lambda function. So we are going to create a Lambda Node.js function. So now we've got our secret retrieved, we've got a Lambda function created. We need to grant access, read access to the Lambda function. So the Lambda can actually access that secret value and retrieve the values from that secret. So the next thing is going to be our cron rule. So I'm going to create a new rule, which is going to be going from AWS events. And we can call this QB email forwarder cron rule. So every hour, basically, it will run targets. It will run the targets, which is it's going to be a new Lambda function. And we pass in the Node.js Lambda function that we created up here. I'm just going to make this capital F, so it doesn't complain. Cool. So we don't really need to name this, to be honest, because we're not going to use it. So just create a new rule. We can actually try and deploy this, and then do a CDK deploy again. It is now, as you can see, starts to deploy, create the CloudFormation change set. So it basically just gives us an overview of what's going to happen. And if you want to deploy these changes, we're going to say yes, I'm going to start deploying it. as you can see here. You can also see it in our CloudFormation AWS account. So you can see InfraStack is what we called it up here, is being now created. So you can see the events, you can see the resources that are getting created. So you can see the Lambda is now being created at this point. So now our CloudFormation has been deployed successfully, and we can see it in the console as well. We can even go to the Lambda functions and then just see, yep, there we go. It has created our Lambda function on the Node 24 runtime. We can make sure the configuration environment variables are set, and yes, they are. We can see that Event Bridge is going to trigger this Lambda. So if you look into Amazon Event Bridge, we should be able to see in scheduled roles, yes, that was created. And we can see that a cron is running every hour. So you can see the next 10 triggers. It's going to be 6 o'clock, 7, 8, 9, 10, blah, blah. Cool. So this should now run it automatically, but we are not going to wait another 17 minutes. So we're going to go into the Lambda file and we're going to click test, and then just click the test button. And there we go. It has successfully executed this Lambda function. Obviously it's not returning anything, but you can see all the resources it's been using and how long it took to run. So one way we can test it again is I can just remove this that we uploaded manually. And what I can do now is I can mark this email again to be unread and remove that label. Apply. So now it is like a brand new email. So what I can do now is I can actually click test again and run this Lambda function. Now it took a bit longer, which suggests that it has done something, which then means it has now uploaded to QuickBooks because it forwarded the email to the QuickBooks account. And yes, there we go. It has now been uploaded with the same PDF file forwarded to the email and then uploaded to QuickBooks. So what this solves basically is whenever I make a payment and then I get an invoice into my account, Lambda function is going to be triggered by the cron that we specified. So it will run every hour. It will look for all the emails under the accounts at Innovel email address that has an attachment, has not been read, subject or the file name contains invoice, and it doesn't have a label for QB forwarded. It will loop through each of the messages that it finds, grab the attachment from that, compose a new email, forward that new email with the attachment to the QuickBooks forwarding email, which will then put it into my receipts. So it basically will be all automated, whereas before I had to log in here every day, select a file and then upload it manually, saving me a lot of time. And I think it was just a fun project to build. So thank you very much guys for watching. And if you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like the video and share the video if you think someone would like it. I have something in my mind for the next video, but I think it's going to be a bit bigger. It will be a bit bulkier project. So I might break that up into multiple parts. But if you're interested, hit the subscribe button. I'll see you in the next video.